Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for December 29th, 2024. I am JD Duran, and my lovely co-host Brendan could not be here tonight. The poor guy has succumbed to the darkness. He currently has a fever of 104, so he's not feeling all too well. The rats have got him, and so he has to go take care of himself. And we were supposed to have a guest tonight, the wonderful Wonder Meg, who joined us rather recently to talk about Night Bitch, was also supposed to be here. And I was very excited to have her here, not just because we always love talking to Meg, but she recently joined the team over at In Session Film. We were very excited to bring her on for this episode to relish in that a little bit, but she had a family emergency, so she had to step out tonight as well. So I am extremely, extremely grateful to my guest that is joining me for this, because it was totally last minute. I was scrambling trying to find someone, and the wonderful Will Bjarnar, he came to my rescue. So Will, thanks for being here, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Always. If there's anything in this world that I love, it's being succumbing to the darkness of Robert Eggers films and being the fourth option. So I really appreciate.
Yeah,
I really do appreciate it though.
You need a fourth option, and Will.
Look, I'm just a ringer. I know.
No, we love having Will on. We had just planned to have Meg for this, and we had scheduled her some months ago for her to be here. It just unfortunately didn't work out. So Will is a great option to have there as the call-in, as the backup. Sometimes you need a great backup quarterback, and they can make all the difference. So you're just my Tom Brady. That's all I'm trying to say here.
For those keeping track at home, I mean, there were 4 quarterbacks who played in today's blowout. My Buffalo Bills just hammering the Jets, and only one of them was scoreless, that being the New York Jets starter, so the enigma, as it were. So I don't know. Everybody else, including the 2 backups who came into the game for both the Bills and the Jets, scored. So listen, I'm just here to be your Mitch Trubisky to Brendan's Josh Allen.
There you go. Yeah, you need those. You need those on your team. So we do appreciate you filling in here last minute. You also came at a recommendation as well. I don't know if I should be releasing this information, but
oh boy,
I don't think he'll care, because we love him, and we know that he is a big fan of yours as well. But in the midst of the chaos and me trying to find someone, our lovely editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, sent me a text to say, I think you should get Will on. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. So I sent Will a message. Obviously, he's here. It all worked out great. So you need a great backup quarterback. You also need a good offensive coordinator that knows what they're doing as well. Like knows how to put the right person into the game.
Look, that's very kind of Dave. Hopefully I don't turn in just a stinker of a performance. I've been staying warm.
Yeah,
you know,
he's staying warm on the sideline. I'm ready to get it, Coach.
It's very kind of Dave.
He's the best.
We like him. We like
Dave. Yeah. So at any rate, we're here to talk about Nosferatu. Robert Eggers, stirring up some discourse on the social medias, as one would expect. Let's talk about Mr. Eggers first before we get into this. What is your relationship with Robert Eggers?
You know, Eggers might be one of my favorite current presently working filmmakers who has only made a couple of features. Yeah. You know, he's got 4, and I thoroughly enjoy each one. Like, for me to say that I think my least favorite of his 4 films is The Lighthouse, a movie that I cherish. is saying something about his gifts. I feel like I've been watching his films since The Witch in 2015 and 2016. Like from the beginning, I remember I saw The Witch when it was in theaters, and I've done the same with each of his other features. Like I know it's only 4,
Yeah.
but everybody tries to lump him in with, like Ari Aster and Jordan Peele and this new age or elevated horror, as people like to call it. I'm not super fond of that term because I just think horror is horror, and it just comes in various forms. One isn't necessarily more elevated than the other, but I've liked Eggers through all of his stages, and I think he's tremendously gifted, and he has a very well refined vision of the worlds he wants to build. It's no coincidence that all of his movies have taken place in the long ago past. I think I would rather that, just because I don't know what I would get. I mean, I'd be excited to see what he would do with, like, quote unquote, a modern story or a present day set story, but I love going back in time with him. I think he's exceptionally talented, and he works with a lot of the best craftsmen in the field. And so it probably comes as no surprise. We'll obviously get into it, but I was a big fan of Nosferatu, and in my book, he's 4 for 4.
Yeah, I will echo a lot of that. I love Robert Eggers as well. The Witch was in my top 10 for 2015, and it's still my favorite Eggers film. The way that film tackles religious fanaticism is something that I deeply, deeply cherish, and I think it's one of the best movies to tackle that particular subject. The Lighthouse, also really great. The Northman is phenomenal. That was in my top 10 of 2022. So Nosferatu certainly was among my most anticipated of the year, hands down. I think he's one of the most vivid filmmakers we have working today. As you're talking about, he has such a lush aesthetic that is incredibly immersive. The technical prowess that he brings to his films is second to none. It's absolutely phenomenal. Gets great performances. So yeah, I've loved Robert Eggers as well over the years, and I'm deeply excited to see what he has in store in the future. But as we get to Nosferatu, so I kind of want to set the table a little bit further. We're both big fans of Robert Eggers. What's your relationship to this material, to Nosferatu, vampire lore, etc.?
Yeah, Nosferatu, I think, first came to mind. I mean, I've known of the lore, as we say, for a long time. Given that the character of Dracula, of which Nosferatu is kind of an offshoot of, has existed in for the last, I don't know, multiple hundreds of years, 200, 300 years. And so as it's become a very common, like, go-to horror, maybe not trope, but just kind of, I guess, molding around the project to throw a vampire in there, because it's something of a human element, even if there are inhuman elements as well. As far as Nosferatu goes, I only got around to seeing basically every, quote unquote, Nosferatu movie within the last year and a half ish, knowing that this was coming. Because I was curious. I mean, I want to say I watched the Murnau 1922 original, called Nosferatu, subtitled A Symphony of Horror. I want to say I watched it in a film class in college, but I'm not entirely sure. After a while, when you are a junior in college, and even if you love the class, you start to kind of be like, okay, the clock is ticking. It's been 2 hours. When are we leaving here? And the cabinet of Dr. Caligari's and the Nosferatu, the vampires, and Battleship Potemkin's just kind of all blend together at a certain point as my eyes glaze over. But I was actually very attentive in that class, and I want to say that I did watch it then. But either way, I consider the Nosferatu character, as it were, to have only really come into my life in the last couple of years. But I'm very glad that it has, because it's opened my eyes kind of in retrospect to a lot of the other vampiric horror stories that I've been watching for years, like Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula and any other schlocky vampire centric cinema, even if it's something like The Last Voyage of the Demeter or something worse than that, if that's possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. My relationship to vampire movies, horror films. I've mentioned this on the show a lot over the years, but to reiterate for any new listeners out there, and this somewhat actually tethers to Robert Eggers in some way as well, because I did not really delve into horror a whole lot before starting In Session Film back in 2013, primarily because I'm a big scaredy cat. That's as simple as it is. I just did not really put a ton of attention to it because of that. And also a lot of the horror films I did see, I found them to be schlocky and uninspired. So it simply wasn't a genre that was grabbing me either when I did kind of delve into it. So my relationship with horror didn't really begin in a real way anyway until 2013. And it was a few years after that where I ended up seeing the Murnau 1922 film and really loved that. And to bring Robert Eggers back into it, The Witch came out in 2015. That would have been 2 years after we started In Session Film. And you couple that with a few other horror films that came out in that time frame. I think of something like It Follows and The Conjuring as a few examples. Like those movies and The Witch really started to reshape my relationship with horror. And like I said, The Witch ended up in my top 10 of the year. So that's not something I would have foreseen for myself 2 years prior, like back in 2013. So my relationship with horror has evolved a lot over the last decade. It's now a genre that I love, that I delve into often over the course of a year. And I've certainly seen a fair share of not just horror films, but vampiric films as well, including the 1922 film, as I mentioned, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and many, many other vampire films that we've seen over the years. Now, I think because I came to the party late, so to speak, I'm certainly, not an expert by any means. There's probably dozens and dozens of vampire films I have not seen. But I've seen a lot of, I'd say like the notable ones that people go to as the classics in this space, if you will. So I am familiar. And I do really love that Murnau film quite a lot. I've seen that, several times over the last 10 years.
It's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's interesting that kind of what you just said made me think about The Ringer's Sean Fennessy, who's hosts the Big Picture movie podcast as well, obviously. They've been starting to do these videos, and one of the videos he recently did was, I think it was the Nosferatu syllabus, where he was making a big long list of movies from all the way back in 22 with the original Nosferatu film by F.W. Murnau to this iteration of like vampire centric cinema. And a lot of the films that were on there were I was either familiar with or had seen or both, but then there were plenty of others where it's like, I didn't even know this thing existed. I think it's because it's such a vast, I guess, not only horror genre, but what you can do with a vampire. You can there's almost an infinite number of stories you can tell, maybe not totally infinite, but wrinkles can be added here and there. I mean, Dracula has been such a popular character for so long because
absolutely,
theoretically, I guess it's easy, because who would want to be haunted by a bloodthirsty fang haver? Not many people, other than maybe Lily Rose Depp. But that's an easy premise. Like, oh no, scary guy with teeth.
Yeah,
he can't go in the sun, but we have to go to bed eventually. Will he kill us when we do? It's oh no.
Yeah.
I'm obviously simplifying it, but there's just so much out there that I don't know if I'll ever, before I die, get through all of the vampire movies I want to see, because it feels like every other year there's 4 more.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the character has been explored to death by this point. Pun intended,
Yes.
I guess.
Yes.
But and I'm looking at Sean Fennessy's vampires list on Letterboxd. I don't know if
Yeah.
that is the verbatim list that you were just talking about, but
It
looking
is.
at
It is,
these
yeah.
here, yeah, there's a fair amount that I've seen, and there's also a lot that I haven't. So it just speaks to what I was saying. Like, I've seen all the big ones, but yeah, there's plenty more I could catch up with over the next several years for sure. And I'm sure I will.
I'm sure there
I'm sure I
are.
will.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who will be making Nosferatu a priority as it is now in theaters, and will have not seen Renfield from.
Yeah.
God help us if that was last year.
Whatever
It
that
feels
was.
long ago.
I know it does feel like forever ago.
2 years, I don't
Yeah.
even know. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's there are plenty, and I don't fault them for not having seen the Renfield film, which also starred Nicholas Hoult as
he was in that, wasn't he?
cuck. He was sort of a cuck in that one too,
Yeah.
but just as a
Yeah.
assistant to a terrible boss. But either way,
Yeah.
there's plenty out there
Yep,
for all
indeed.
tastes.
Indeed. All right, now that we've kind of laid our cards out on the table, let's go ahead
Yeah.
and jump into Robert Eggers' new film, Nosferatu. It is, of course, written and directed by the one Robert Eggers. It stars Bill Skarsgård, Nicholas Hoult, Lily Rose Depp, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Willem Dafoe, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Nosferatu, it is a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire that is infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. All right, let's jump into it. Will, what did you think about Nosferatu?
I thought it was excellent. This is one of my favorite films of the year. I think it's maybe Eggers at his most fully realized thus far. And I say that because I liked what Matt Zoller-Seitz wrote for Roger Ebert in his review of this Nosferatu. He said that Eggers is kind of a rare filmmaker who can put modern consciousness, I believe was the wording he used, aside when he's telling his stories. Like, there aren't metaphors and analogies, just stuff that happens, even if it might be unexpected. And I think that's rang true throughout his filmography, but certainly here. Not to continue to beat the Sean Fennessy drum, but like he interviewed Eggers on The Big Picture for their Nosferatu episode and asked him, like, hey, so this whole thing with Orlok, trying to Count Orlok, which is the other name that Nosferatu, I mean, that is Nosferatu's name. Nosferatu's kind of a demonic nickname he's been given, but it's like he's bringing this plague wherever he goes. Did you have any thoughts as you were releasing it into a quote unquote post COVID landscape? And Eggers is like, no, it's not about that. it's not about that.
Sure.
It's about Nosferatu. It's a vampire who wanted to buy a house in Germany and haunt a bunch of people. That's what it's about. It's not about COVID. But so I just found that to be a funny moment, because you could poke holes in any filmmaker's work and be like, it's an analogy for this. But I did like that Zoller-Seitz pointed that out, because I think Nosferatu is the most direct film he perhaps has made so far, because it is really about this creature, man of sorts, vampire, who has an agenda and also has this extreme power over the young woman, played incredibly by Lily Rose Depp. What I think is probably almost certainly the best performance of her career, with apologies to the 7 people who liked The Idol. I thought from a craft level, it's certainly one of the biggest accomplishments of the year. I thought from a performance level as well, I think the entire ensemble from top down is really, really great in this. I mean, even like Ralph Ineson, who shows up as kind of the skeptic of like, she is not possessed by this vampire. And that's kind of his only bit throughout the film. Like, he's excellent. Really, really strong work from everybody involved. And Eggers, you know, he was introduced to Nosferatu when I think he was 9. And I want to say he's either in his late 30s, early 40s at this point, and it's finally coming to life. I can't obviously imagine another form for it to, you know, come to fruition in, because this is the one that we have. This is the one that we are seeing. I'm curious as to how many, you know, renditions it went through over the course of his life dreaming up this project, because he also put on a stage play version of it when he was working for a local theater back in his hometown. Like, he has such a relationship to this story and this figure that the fact that it was executed to the level that this Nosferatu was, it almost seems like a given how talented he is, but it's also a really, really wonderful surprise to be like, oh, Eggers can do even more than what he's already done with these very time specific, location specific, dread specific stories, this being foremost among them. Honestly, it's really, really, really good stuff.
Yep, I am with you. I think this film is really great. Certainly one of the best films of the year. And I think with any Robert Eggers film, you simply have to begin with the craft is simply absurd. Always. Absolutely insane. The cinematography is staggering. The detail in every frame is utterly ridiculous. Those shots of Thomas as he's making his way up to the castle had me elevating out of my seat. However, maybe more impressively, it's the sound design that grabbed me more than anything else. Right. There's such a deep intensity to the sound that's incredibly immersive and pulsating. Eggers doesn't overdo it, but when the film vibrates, the sound crackles with this haunting quality that serves Orlok in this story so perfectly. And speaking of the makeup work of Orlok and the rendering of him here to make him less conventional by vampire standards, or more so this corpse walking around, was a incredible rendition, especially when coupled with Skarsgård's performance. The costuming and production design are all excellent. The performances are really great. The score is incredible. It is simply one of the best directed films of the year. The craft is immaculate. And I also find it to be a compelling departure from other iterations of Dracula. It's of course embedded in Eggers's lush commitment to realism and period accurate aesthetics. Obviously, realism is a bit looser here, given the otherworldly abilities that we see from Orlok. However, it is aesthetically more grounded. That on its own terms, I do think is invigorating, but there's also much more attention to occultism and brazen sexuality than a lot of other interpretations. It's funny you're talking about how Eggers might see this as simply his version of a vampire movie, of Nosferatu, and maybe it's nothing more than that. I don't fully buy that. I think it is on his mind. The attention that he gives to occultism and sexuality here, it is such a big through line, and it is what distinguishes this film in a lot of ways from other vampire movies. Now, again, I might say that a little myopically because I haven't seen the 4,000 movies about vampires that exist. Okay.
Well, get on it. I mean, I don't know what's the matter with you.
I know.
Get to work.
But of those that I have seen, and especially when we're talking about the more notable works such as the Murnau film or Bram Stoker's Dracula, the 79 Nosferatu, I think.
Yeah,
is when that came out. Yeah. So, like, of those iterations, this film does detour in a different way than what those films do. It does depict Orlok and Ellen in a very distinct way that I'm sure we'll talk more about as we go here. And I did find the exploration of that very captivating.
I agree. I think that's honestly the most interesting thing about this one is how I hesitate to go the like film Twitter route where everybody immediately goes to Eggers Nosferatu is super horny. It's like, all right, yes, there is a major focus on sexuality, but I think it's more through the lens of obsessive desire than it is, I don't know, the sexuality of challengers per se. Like,
Sure.
If we're looking at horny movies from 2024, there are two sides of the spectrum, and a movie like Challengers is on the complete other side of the horny spectrum as a movie like Nosferatu. Because Nosferatu, obviously, number one, genres are not even remotely the same of those two films. So why I'm comparing them or beating that horse is dead as Count Orlok, I don't know. But it's late and I'm working through my thoughts.
Sure.
But there is the obsession of having this sort of entity kind of in your mind, like a earworm almost, just wiggling its way through, never leaving you alone, never letting you come to a sort of stasis with your thoughts. I mean, a lot of what goes on in this movie is that there's not much said specifically about Ellen, Lily Rose Depp's character, about how she used to have these tormented nightmares and afflictions about this figure that only she, comes into contact with, at least early on. Over the course of the movie, more characters come into contact with Orlok, Skarsgård's Nosferatu character. But at the beginning, there's not like a, hey, here's the backstory in its entirety of when Lily Rose Depp like first came into, what came under this spell almost. It's more about the fact that there is just this thing in her mind, embedded in her soul, this darkness that won't let her go because it somehow gives him life.
Which is why that opening scene is incredible, because it's all visual storytelling. There's very little dialogue. There's obviously no plot involved. It is haunting for sure, nightmarish, and it's all told through Eggers' visuals. Again, the craft.
Right. Like, I think the first thing we've seen in a lot of the trailers is also one of the first things you see in the film, where Rose Depp's character is saying, come to me, hear my call, as she's kind of praying.
Yeah.
Which I think is another very interesting theme, this sort of, religious element of worshiping even the darkest of creatures, which she does, whether it's by choice or by possession, is certainly a topic of discussion. But, it goes from that and a first encounter with this thing that's haunting her to she's married to Nicholas Holt's character, Thomas, I believe is his name. And they got married essentially because she was hoping that her love for him would kind of leave this all in the past, and he shared the same feelings, but now it's creeping back into their marriage, and he's struggling at work, and all of these other things are being thrown into disarray because of this dark cloud looming over not just their marriage and this woman, but kind of their little German village almost as a whole. But it's because of this one person that this creature is obsessed with, just as she is with him. I really liked the balance between the occult and the just straight up horror that comes with this sort of creature. Like there is the element of the cult will possess you as you give yourself over to it. And then there's also the side where it's just like, holy shit, this dude's scary. Like I'm really, I don't want to be in his manor with all of his rats, and his prosthetic penis is hanging out and he's bleeding from various, vessels through his torn body, because he is, as you said, kind of this decaying ghoul throughout the film. And not enough can be said about how good, insofar as you could say it's good, Skarsgård looks as Orlok. I mean, it's exceptional work on a crafts level.
Yeah,
and I love the mustache too. Like that's
oh, it's great.
As you said, it's a different sort of thing, but it's a different sort of Dracula. It's not this, pale, like dark blush makeup that you would see on old school Draculas.
He's
like,
a
this guy's
corpse. He's a
decaying from the
walking
inside out.
corpse.
Yeah.
That's what he is. Yeah. And what you're speaking to there, I think, is the beating heart of this film. There is a direct tethering between occultism and sexuality in this film that I find incredible. All of these movies, speaking of vampire Dracula movies, they feature occultism in some sort of way. It is foundational to the lore around Dracula, obviously. And it's, of course, a big part of this film as well. And there's something about it here that, when tethered to Eggers' grounded approach, makes it incredibly visceral, as you're just talking about there. Certainly part of that could be Lily Depp's performance, because, my God, does she bring a terrifying tangibility to Ellen's possession. Yeah. But either way, there's a deeply haunting quality to it, which I think is vital because of how Eggers connects that dread to sexuality. I love Murnau's Nosferatu, as I mentioned earlier, but Ellen's sacrifice in that film is more around beauty and purity. Here, in this film, Orlok's obsession with Ellen is much more lustful. And the way he pursues her, rendering Ellen possessed and full of nightmares, is something that is interpreted as melancholy to those around her. So this is Eggers' way of deconstructing the taboo, at least that's how it would have been seen at the time in which this takes place, of female sexuality and pleasure, which, given the time period that Eggers is depicting, and we know he loves his authenticity, Ellen could have easily been convicted of witchcraft. But instead, Eggers gives her liberation, an idea that I think is very effective because, again, of how visceral the occultism is in this film and how it works to deconstruct sexuality of that time, and maybe even now in some ways. It's not beauty and purity in the traditional sense, but one could argue there is a beauty and purity in sexual freedom. I love how Eggers explores that in this film.
It's really smart. I like that point a lot. I mean, there's a line in the movie where, just to speak to Orlok, someone is observing, they say he is infinity.
Yes.
And that, I think, again, serves as a through line for the entire film from any thematic standpoint that you want to look at it, whether it's the occult, sexuality, maybe religion, or just straight up horror. Like, he has an infinite grasp, the Count Orlok character, over a community and its people, but also he has an infinite grasp and kind of a chokehold, as he does multiple times in the movie. Literally choking people. Very literally choking people, which, hey, depending on what you like, you might find that interesting in a sexual manner, choking. So there you go again, Eggers. Good shout. But I just lost my train of thought as I was talking about sexual choking. That's good. Get back on track, Will. No, but there is just, I fully agree with you that there is an element to sexual freedom that is about beauty and purity. And I think that he is definitely focusing on, if he's focusing on beauty and purity in the least bit, it's through that theme of the sexuality of the main character, of the fact that, there's a key moment in the film where Rose Depp and Holt, their characters, they come together, for sexual congress, and it's kind of through the lens of, like, we have been overcome with this darkness, and they almost have sex because that darkness is telling them to, in a way, or is being kind of hoping that maybe they can exercise it through their love, and it doesn't work. And again, I think that infinite chokehold that I mentioned just kind of makes the film that much more interesting to continue to unpack. I mean, I've seen it 3 times now, and I'm going to continue to see it because I just think it's that exceptional and that worth
Yeah.
just continuing to dissect on every single watch, just kind of be like, oh, here's another thing that he's packing in here, but maybe it's on a subtle level that you do only find yourself noticing on a third or fourth watch. I think that's a beautiful thing about all of his films, even ones that don't run 2 hours and 20 minutes like this one, which I'm not complaining about whatsoever, because I'll take all the handlebar mustache Count Orlok that I can get. Again, I really think in terms of having a grasp or a grip on every single element of a production, this is where Eggers is at the peak of his powers almost, because, and I said this in my review for Geek Vibes Nation, I don't know if that's because of the passion that he's had for this particular property for so long, or just his gifts as a filmmaker, probably both.
Yeah, a little bit of
That's
both.
certainly helps the cause. But either way, I mean, he's been doing this since, as you said, 2015 with The Witch, at least on a feature scale. And you mentioned the discourse thing, and I don't want to get too off topic as we continue to unpack the movies, its themes, its performances, and all of the technical. You did mention discourse. Like, I'm really struggling to understand what more people wanted from this movie than what is delivered. Maybe it's just because I was so highly anticipating it, and I love his work, and I love this property, and knew that if anybody was going to deliver, give this output in this fashion, this manner, whatever you want to call it, it would be Eggers. Maybe that's just my own personal bias of sorts. But then again, if this had struck me as a stinker, I wouldn't mince words in saying so. I just don't see it. I don't know what more people want from an adaptation of Nosferatu by a guy who's loved the story since he was 9.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that, I know some of the conversation has been around the performances, and maybe we can talk about that here in a little bit. Some of it could come down to the depiction of Orlok, as we mentioned earlier. It is a far cry from the traditional rendering that we've come to know of Dracula, which I absolutely love here. I love that it's just a corpse. It's nothing like we've seen before. And it is brooding. There is a haunting quality to it that I deeply appreciate, especially because of Skarsgård's performance and that booming voice that he brings to the character.
Yeah.
Some of it could come to the themes of sexuality here, because again, even as I mentioned a moment ago, that so much of what Ellen experiences here would have been taboo at the time in which this takes place. Certainly that could be applicable to now as well. But I do love how Eggers goes about exploring that here, and the symbolism that he injects. You think about those possessive moments of Ellen in this film, they are orgasmic in nature, something that I don't think is accidental. And the men around her in those moments, how do they come off to us on screen? They are confused and frightened. They have no clue how to approach her, which is why, again, you go back to, they just label it melancholy. That's right. She's succumbed to some sort of deep grief. They don't know how to articulate it. Like, sexual freedom and liberation is a foreign policy to them. They have no clue. And maybe you can argue whether that's subtle or not here. I don't think it really matters all that much. That could be something that rubs people the wrong way. But even if it's not subtle, I think that is fantastic symbolism. Some of it could also be the way Orlok is funneled through that same prism, because as we noted earlier, his pursuit of Ellen here is aggressive. I mean, when she initially refuses him there at the end, he gives her an ultimatum, right? And begins to attack those around her in order to provoke Ellen. And he does not hold back in his violence. I could see how his forcefulness could be off-putting for some, but I think it gives more weight to how lustful he is. And it leads to what is the most striking film of this film, and certainly of the year in its entirety, where Ellen becomes possessed. You get that incredible moment of physical acting from Depp that we've seen in the trailers.
Gosh.
You see the stills out there. It's a phenomenal moment of physical acting. And in that sequence, as she's possessed, she gives into her pleasures, and maybe slight spoilers here. She begins to have sex with her husband. It is a phenomenal moment. And that leads to the final scene of the film that gives power to both occultism and sexual liberation. When Ellen realizes that her freedom is the only thing that can defeat Orlok's hostility. And there's, I guess I don't want to get into too many spoilers, but there's a level of pleasure in the sacrifice. It's something that she consents to, and it is really beautiful. Narratively, it is familiar because this is a remake after all, but the way it is rendered through that occultism, through sexual liberation, the way that is attacked here as an artist from Egger's perspective, I found that quite distinctive. It is familiar narratively, but the execution, I think, is vivid and new, and maybe it goes about it in a way that subverts expectations. I don't know. I guess that is, to your point, that seems to be the case given the discourse out there, but I don't know. I loved it personally.
I think the ending, and I agreed not to get into too much spoiler territory, but I think I'll just say this. I think it's easily among the best endings of the year, if not the best. I mean, even just from an image standpoint, it's absolutely stunning. The scene and the landscape he sort of, Eggers and his crew, build and craft inside of this one room where the ending unfolds. But I really like that point you made again about the melancholy and how all of the men, or most of the men, and I say most, I'll get to what I mean when I say most in a moment. Most of the men in the room are just kind of like, oh, this woman is experiencing a great deal of warped pain that we haven't seen before, and she's crying. She must be depressed. We gotta. You're just sad.
Yeah,
like you can't possibly be feeling. Yeah. Oh my God, you're experiencing sexual freedom on your own without the presence of your husband. You must be depressed. We gotta get rid of you.
I know.
And then the only person in the room who actually is like, let me see if there's anything more here is Willem Dafoe's character.
Yeah.
And he is I'm just overtired. I've been up since like 6:15 this morning coming home from the holidays, but I'm cackling hearing his voice in my head. Just what's plaguing you, my child?
Yeah.
What's going on, my child? It's he's the best.
He's the greatest.
And then there was the news that Eggers has already offered Dafoe like a role in both of his next two films. I'm like, yes, just keep it coming, because what's wrong with you, my child? I just need more of Willem Dafoe, deranged Willem Dafoe, which is just kind of what his career is now, I guess. You know, like post Florida Project.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, he's having the time of his life here. And
one of the lines in the movie, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but he invokes Isaac Newton in describing the presence of Count Orlok, and it's one of the funniest lines of the year in one of the darkest movies of the year. It's exceptional.
No, he's having a great time. It is a diverting performance. I completely agree. And again, to speak to the symbolism of those possessed moments, of like what he brings to this movie in that regard, what does he represent here? He's not the layman, right? He is, as you noted, the one that understands what is at stake here, because he understands occultism. He's the one that studies it. There is such a deep connection between those two things here that I do find absolutely fascinating. And, as you unpack that, and again, I think as you do, perhaps that is what drives some people away from this film. I don't know. I'm simply trying to wrap my head around it because, like you, I do struggle to understand why some people walk out of this, and maybe it is for clickbait reasons. I don't know, but there's certainly a lot of polarization, maybe not a lot, but a fair amount of polarization around the film. But though that idea, like that connectivity between occultism and sexuality here, I do think is fascinating, especially given that Eggers is pulling from not vampire lore, but the lore, or not Dracula lore, but vampire lore.
Right.
And there is a difference between the two, because I've seen some criticisms around Orlok and how he's depicted here, not just aesthetically, but the idea that we should have some sort of pity for him because of his immortality and how that's a lonely and tortured curse devoid of love and companionship. And fundamentally, I do think that's an interesting idea, one that has been explored in other iterations. Again, I think of the 79 Nosferatu does that very well. But again, Eggers isn't trying to replicate those movies. Orlok in this film isn't a tortured figure. Eggers is pulling from the lore that preceded Stoker's novel, lore that is rooted in fear and uncertainty, something that makes sense of Orlok's aggressiveness in this film. Fostering empathy for him completely undermines what Eggers is going for. He wants to connect that dread to sexuality. And it highlights the myopic ethos of those that don't see what Ellen is experiencing here. And I do think there is a level of, as men, I think that there is a level of, I think our viewpoints are going to be limited in that from that perspective. But I think Eggers brings an honesty to it that I think is absolutely fantastic. And again, as I do my best to understand that more and more, like I am actively trying to peel back those layers. I want to see, that disparity in what it means. And as our society begins to, in my viewpoint, devolve, I feel like a lot of what is being explored here, to me, it seems more applicable to 2024 than maybe we would have thought of 20 years ago. It feels like Eggers is more in tune, maybe accidentally, to your point. Maybe like with COVID, he didn't really anticipate that when he was 9 years old and obsessed with this story.
Right. Yeah. No.
But in 2024, given where we've landed, I think there is something that is applicable to today in that regard.
Yeah. God forbid 9-year-old Robert Eggers is like, in 34 years, my dream will be recognized by focus features, and it will be in the intervening years of a global pandemic that killed millions.
Yeah.
Very good. No, this is, it could, I think that is almost a conversation or like a podcast in and of itself, of all the metaphors that you could theoretically pull from Nosferatu, and if they were accidental or just inherent in what he was thinking about. Because as I mentioned from the Matt Zoller Sites review, like he just can kind of remove himself from that, or at least it seems that he can. But that takes a special kind of discipline that I don't know. Very few filmmakers have it. And many of them almost kind of lean into the fact that they don't and make exceptional, striking work. Like, think about, I don't know. I mean, I'll just bring up Oppenheimer, I guess, because another excuse to bring up Oppenheimer is a good one in my book. But like you talk about Christopher Nolan, that the end of that film with Oppenheimer noting, like, when we thought we were going to destroy the world and watch it end, I think we did. And then we just see images of the world burning. Like that's Nolan acknowledging like, yeah, this is actually a story that has reverberations throughout history and it connects directly to our daily life. Maybe Eggers goes into his writing and directing kind of being like, yeah, no, I don't give a shit about that. But then it just comes through because he is a human being who lives in the world. Like, yeah, we kind of view these stars and directors and artists, especially many cerebral ones, as figures we cannot possibly understand. They live in their own world. But as a matter of fact, they do still live on the same planet that we do and see the same news that we do, depending on what channels they choose to watch, I guess. But, you know, like, it's going to be in your mind, whether it's pushed very, very far in the back or it's directly at the front, I think, for any filmmaker. So I'd like to think I'd like to take Eggers at his word when he says something like, yeah, no, I wasn't thinking about that, dude. It's Nosferatu. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it might just be intrinsically impossible for that to be the case. I don't know. To sum it up, I just think anybody who disagrees that this film is great, you should be ashamed of yourself. One, for sure, we are putting that out there here and now. You should retract all statements and opinions. And two, you are just as bad as Ralph Ineson and Aaron Taylor Johnson in this film saying, oh, she's just a depressed woman. It's fine. We'll get her some meds and a hot towel. No, I'm just kidding. I welcome all opinions, but
Well,
I don't know. I think it's really, really,
and I
really
think
inspired stuff.
I think what's really fascinating as we peel back those layers further, again, going back to the tethering of occultism and sexuality here, to me, it's fascinating. Like, it provokes these interesting questions, and I didn't really anticipate it going into this conversation, but on the other side of it, I do think this is a great companion piece to something like The Witch, because at the beginning of this film, Ellen, and I believe you noted this earlier, she is seeking companionship. And so she is praying for some sort of spirit to embody her or provoke her in some sort of way, which is what leaves Orlok to her. And thus that obsession begins. And as the film goes, we see how that lust in Orlok, like, evolves and becomes more powerful as he begins to get closer to her and everything that we mentioned earlier. And then it ends in this way where Ellen has to, or is given a choice to, to make this sacrifice, which again, when you contrast that to the 22 version, where it is born out of beauty and purity by those same standards, that's not really Ellen in this film. So I do love how the beauty, the purity that comes out of Ellen here is born out of that sexual freedom, and how that manifests itself in this film. Again, it comes through occultism, and I think it asks questions, it provokes questions as it relates to why would a woman need to seek, I don't want to say something demonic, but it is a far cry from, let's say, the Christian foundation that our country is birthed from, that many countries kind of see themselves as. And this is something that The Witch tackles as well, right? Because that film is all about religious fanaticism and the hypocrisy of religious fanaticism. And I love that film for it. And I think in a roundabout way, this film, while it isn't necessarily about religiosity exclusively or explicitly, as you noted, it's certainly a part of this film in some way, though.
Yeah.
Especially when, you think about the lore of what Nosferatu is, right? It is a demon. Like, that's where all of this is born out of. So you have Ellen praying to some sort of demon, if you will, a spirit, to possess her. And so you do get those kind of somewhat traditional, but still fascinating, visceral moments of Ellen being possessed by some sort of spirit, as you would seeing something like The Exorcist, for example. But
Sure.
where it detours from something like The Exorcist, again, is those moments of possession here, they are sexual in nature. And I find that utterly fascinating. Like, that idea of loneliness and, feeling sexually stuck in a world that doesn't recognize it. And of course, when does this take place? In the mid 1800s, something to that effect. But that idea of being disconnected and having no sexual outlet, I see a world where that's still happening now. So like, for as much as Eggers loves to go back to a time period where he can play in a specific sandbox, and we've seen that in all of his films to this point.
Now.
Yeah, absolutely. The Witch, Nosferatu, those films, at least on a thematic level, on an emotional level, absolutely tether to today's world. And I think they provoke some really, really interesting, provocative questions as it relates to a faith, and in this specific case, does it get to a point where I have to go seek sexual freedom in a demon because the Christian world can't provide that for me? Like, I'm being a little bit more blunt with it than what the film does, but but
no point in the script does Ellen say, "I gotta fuck this vampire" because I'm not getting much from Sunday sermon.
No, and look,
Not quite.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point too, because I've seen a lot of criticism around Thomas as some sort of myopic character that doesn't understand his wife. And I do think there is some truth to that. However, I think some of it is born out of simple ignorance. I think he does care for Ellen. I think he just doesn't understand her on that level. And I think that distinction has to be made, because I don't think Eggers is criticizing Thomas as much as he's saying at this time, especially, but again, maybe today as well, a lot of men just don't understand what that means. Like, what is sexual freedom in a woman? What does that look like? Again, the men in this film, when they see it, and they literally see it at times, they're confused and frightened.
Yeah.
They don't know how to articulate it. They don't know how to interpret it. They have to go get the occult guy, and
go get the guy who was rejected from his profession because he decided to study this, forbidden or prohibited, as it were, science or idea, and get him to come in, because everything that we thought we had all this preparation for, we actually don't know squat about it.
Yeah.
Hey,
exactly.
you, buddy, who we laughed out of the room, can you come back and tell us what the hell's going on here?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the great irony of that, even with us having this conversation, there could be listeners of the show that, like female listeners specifically, that listen to this and can provide even more insight into it, than what we can. So there's certainly a meta conversation to be had around that as well, like around this conversation. I mean, I
certainly
do
be interested in hearing more on that and reading more on that too.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, because to this point, I haven't read a whole lot of reviews, to be perfectly honest, because I wanted my thoughts to be my own coming into this. But now that we've had this conversation, I'm certainly going to go out there and try to read as much as I possibly can. Because I do think there's a lot to unpack there. Like, and those provocative questions, like around Ellen's desires and why she feels the need to go to the length she does. And it certainly speaks to the limitations of sexual freedom of that time. But again, today as well.
Maybe today. We just want to throw it out there.
I find that fascinating. And to your point earlier, and I guess to circle back to kind of your big question, why do people not find that interesting? Or where is the disconnect there? like, I don't know. And it's easy to kind of shrug it off and go, this is a really great film. I don't understand how people can miss it. But in a genuine way, I know this is impossible on social media because it's all about clickbait and clout and, you know, creating these extreme arguments in order to garner that clout. But I would be interested to have a genuine conversation that is in good faith to hear what that disconnect is. Because similarly, I don't know. Like, I don't know why people wouldn't find that interesting, but I'd be curious. I would be open-minded to hear what that is.
I'm open-minded to plenty of positions. I mean, that's what film criticism and film discussion is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Since I wrote my own review, and once it was published, I felt fine to go out and read, obviously, the critics that I frequent. And I'll be honest, I was kind of on the same wavelength, or at least in terms of enjoyment, with many of them. But those dissenting reviews of, I'm not on board with this like everybody else is, I can certainly entertain those and listen to them. What I can't do is just little jabs of sort of nothingness about performance or whatever, without any sort of context. Like, there's been so much, we haven't even said his name yet. There has been so much about, Aaron Taylor Johnson is terrible in Nosferatu. I've seen it from multiple different people who I would sometimes characterize as reputable, or at least have taste that I can appreciate. And they're like, Aaron Taylor Johnson is terrible in this. He's certainly not the best part of the movie. He's not even close, but I think he gives a pretty strong performance. And maybe that's due to the fact that he's working with a director like Robert Eggers on a project of this nature, and it's not Craven the Hunter. But no disrespect to JC. Right. Well, you didn't miss anything. No disrespect to JC Chandor, but that, I don't think he has much control over that either. I think that's much more of a paycheck job than the guy who made A Most Violent Year and Triple Frontier and Margin Call wants to go make a Craven movie. I really don't think that's the case. But regardless, I thought Aaron Taylor Johnson, for what he has to do in this movie, which is kind of be a shit heel of sorts and kind of be like, all of this is nonsense. Any of you who buy that this is the occult are completely insane to me. Me, my wife, and our daughters are gonna live our regular life, and I guess you can like deal with Ellen's, melancholy in the room downstairs, but try your best to keep us out of it. And then, of course, I'm not going to spoil, but there is a fate that he and his family then come to, and whether it's life or death is not really the point. It's just the fact that everything he thought he believed ends up, falling by the wayside and being proven wrong. And I think there are layers to even his performance that dive into that kind of show him sort of evolving from this just rejection or knee-jerk reaction and rejection of this idea to a startling acknowledgement of what is his true state as a man, as a husband, as a business owner, as a friend, all of these things. And I think ATJ is really good in the movie. But that's just one of the small examples. I mean, honestly,
just to
end of the day,
to speak to that real quickly, generally, I'm not the biggest fan of Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think he's fine. I don't see him as a great actor by any stretch of the imagination. But in this film, there are two primary elements to his character that he has to convey. One is that he loves his wife and kids. And I think that comes through in those opening scenes. I think he does a great job there. And then the other aspect to his character, and this is key to not just the film, but our conversation, he has to vividly bring credence to that myopic nature, that he's frightened by what he sees and he can't articulate it. He doesn't know what he's looking at. He doesn't understand Ellen. again, he's one of those that just calls it melancholy, as Thomas does
Right.
as well. So the idea that he comes off maybe a little ignorant and myopic, that's not a bad aspect of his performance. That is crucial
No.
to the character's, like the ethos of the character here and the film. It's like central to the
Right.
film's themes. And I think he's very good at portraying that. Now, does that maybe play into his strengths as an actor because he's not the greatest of actors? Actually, I think it does. Like, because you're not asking him to really go deep into a man's, like, you're not asking him to give like an Adam Driver type performance here. Like, he has to convey,
No.
you know, like kind of this, like this unawareness of what's around him. And that's something that, given his talents, he's able to do very well. Now, I think he does that in other films and in other performances that are a hindrance. But in this film, I think it's actually clever casting because it services that character and its themes very well. So I think he's actually really good here.
I think he is too. And I like that point you just made. I think that you're not even asking him to give a Nicholas Hoult type performance.
No.
Let alone an Adam Driver. Like, Holt's doing eons more because he has to go into so
Yes.
many different registers where, I mean, honestly, in construction, the Aaron Taylor Johnson character in Nosferatu is probably among the simplest in the movie.
Yes.
He is a guy who is a reasonably hard worker, but is doing so because he runs a business and just bosses people around, makes good money, loves his wife and his kids, and doesn't want anything to hurt them, so refuses to believe that anything can, that there is nothing that he cannot stop from getting to his family or to him. And then when that all proves to be false, he is startled and has to face it, or just ends up facing it because he has no other choice, whatever it may be. But that's just, I mean, Holt is going all over the register in a really excellent way, because I think as last time I was on, we were talking about juror number 2. I mean, this is yet another leg of Nicholas Holt's great year in 2024. Because I think he is all over the map in an exceptional way, from very stoic to I don't know where I am, the people I am amongst, where I'm going. This whole thing kind of feels uneasy to me, to then straight terror, to then having to be once again dutiful husband who tries to help his wife, but still, for even having encountered Count Orlok, is still kind of like, man, what's wrong with this chick? Why can't we figure this out? It's like, bro, you saw the mustache. If anybody sees that mustache, immediately it's over.
It's and that's a really great point. There is so much more depth to Thomas here that, you know, gives credence to Nicholas Hoult having that role. Because I think, like, people have pointed out, Harry Styles, I believe, was originally cast as that character. I do not see him pulling that off. Because, there is a lot to Thomas here where, as we mentioned earlier, there is nothing nefarious about him. I don't think that he's bland. I don't think that he's working against Helen. He's pure and sincere and loving. He wants to do what's best for Ellen. He just doesn't understand the disconnect, again, regarding her desires for sexual liberation, which is obviously such a big part of this film. There are only 2 characters that do, as we pointed out, you know, and so there is a lot of emotional nuance to Thomas that I really like. And when he's in the presence of Orlok, to your point, there's a lot of this vivid, horrific fear that he has to portray as well and give credence to that. And he's fan-freaking-tastic in those moments as well. So, like, I mean, given where that character goes, and then there's everything at the end of the film as well that I think is fantastic. So he's had a really, really great year. And I think this is another good performance for him. I know we're going a little long here, but as we wind down, we cannot leave this conversation without talking about Lily Rose Depp.
No,
a lot of people really love this performance. I believe you noted earlier that you're really high on her here.
Yeah, I think she's really, really special here.
Okay.
I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, and even edit this out if I'm wrong. I want to say she made it onto In Session's surprise or
I think that
breakthrough
is
or
correct.
surprise performance.
Yes.
One of the two. And I think that, people may argue that, well, it can't be a breakthrough because she's been a known commodity and all of it. I don't know that I agree with that. And maybe that's why it would end up in surprise performance, just because of what people have seen her do before. Like, I watched The Idol, and I'm struggling to find anything really to say about it because I think it's pretty dreadful. And I don't think she's particularly good in it. I think her performance is a little deranged, and maybe that's just a Sam Levinson problem. But, we talked about Harry Styles. Hey, remember Don't Worry, Darling. God, Holt, far better choice. Well, the original choice for Ellen here was Anya Taylor-Joy. And I remember, I'll just admit it, having an opposite reaction that I did to Holt getting the part instead of Styles to Lily Rose Depp getting the part when Anya Taylor-Joy had to step aside due to scheduling conflicts. Because I'm a big fan of Anya Taylor-Joy. I think she's one of the better young actresses working today. Just really, really rock solid performer across many genres. And also the most recent thing I'd seen from Lily Rose Depp was The Idol. So I was just kind of like, what can she bring to a character that I know is going to be to have its horizons broadened, if you will, with a director and writer like Eggers taking this character to a different sort of level. And she is, it's as we said, it's remarkably physical. And Eggers has championed her so far, just absolutely going to bat for her, saying everything you see her do on screen in this film is her. It's not, none of it is like, done in post. None of it is CGI. That is just her going somewhat, ballistic, really seeming like a woman under the influence, a woman possessed. And it's not only is it convincing, it's truly, truly startling watching it happen. Like you mentioned how all the men in the room are either confused or frightened watching it happen. I think that's because, yes, that theme of sexual liberation is there, but for us as an audience, understanding that that's sexual liberation occurring in some way, but also it's possession, and knowing that for a fact, to watch it is all the more startling because of that. I mean, her body is convulsing through 60% of this movie. And when she's not doing that, she's like either, putting on a good face for the public or whimpering. And none of those states are happy states. And she really, really captures the essence of each, and even plenty more state of minds that I have neglected to mention. It's a really, really, really physical and emotional, and it's one of the better performances of the year, I think, by a lead performer. And it's a difficult role. It's a difficult part to play. Yes, it's called Nosferatu, so everybody thinks it's the Nosferatu Count Orlok show, and in some ways the attraction is that character, of course, the Skarsgård. We hadn't seen what he looks like and all, but I think if there's any reason to see this movie aside or even ahead of that, it's Rose Depp's performance. She's really, really excellent.
No, it's certainly the Orlok Ellen show for sure. And Lily Rose Depp is a key central piece to this film. And you're right. It is physically very demanding. It is a very convulsing type of performance, and the fact that she did all of that on her own is incredible. It truly is
Amazing.
astonishing to watch. And in some sequences, it's just flatly chilling. She's really, really great in terms of the physical nature of the performance. I say this at the risk of losing you and some of our listeners. However, I didn't always love the performance. This is where I get tomatoes thrown at me a little bit. As much as I deeply, deeply admire the physical aspect of the performance, there are a few lines of dialogue that didn't land fully with me, that fell a little flat. I still think the emotion of the character is always true. And that is still felt because of the overall performance that she gives. I thought Ellen was a great aspect to the film, and ultimately is, what makes the film as engrossing as it is. The only thing that keeps me from loving it, again, I'm really high on the performance. I'm really high on the film. It'll end up in my top 20 at the end of the year. I really like the film a lot, really like the performance a lot. The only thing that keeps me from fully embracing the performance is a few lines of dialogue I think come off a little flat. Like there's just a few moments that don't always work for me. So it's a slight, ever so slight criticism that I do have of the film. Other than that, I think she's really great. Like I still think she gives a better, certainly more nuanced and vibrant performance comparatively to something like Aaron Taylor Johnson, who again, I think is serviceable here. Like he was well cast. So despite those reservations, I still think she's really great here. So just to bring some clarity to that.
I can see what you're saying. It's not perfect by any means. Some of it can be a little overcooked, but I think the same could be said for the movie. It's not a perfect movie. I do find it exceptional, however. I think we have shared opinions here.
Yeah, I mean, really, because I think I said this on social media, and I guess this will be my final thought on the film.
Sure.
I love Eggers. I think he is one of the best we have working today. I completely agree with you. He is 4 for 4 for me. However, if I was going to rank them, and I do struggle with that with Robert Eggers, because that's like trying to rank your children and who's crazy enough to do that. But if we were to engage in that exercise, I do think this might be my least favorite of Eggers. And again, I say that as like, I love the movie. I love the movie. It'll end up in my top 20 at the end of the year. So again, this is a crazy exercise. But I think if I'm going to look at those 4 films, and I don't think this is a fault of the film, because I think it executes very well at what it's trying to do. But I think of the 4, this is the least experimental of them. It's a little bit more straightforward. Now it tackles the material very well. As we talked about, I love its provocative themes and how it tackles occultism and sexuality and tethers those two things together. It is extremely provocative in that way. And again, why I will go to bat for this film. However, I think I prefer the experimentation of the other 3 slightly more. So like if that
and
was...
how would you, not that it needs to be a ranking necessarily, but just for my own curiosity, because I am someone who reads lists, how would you rank those other 3? I think The Witch obviously is first. So then what are your 2 and 3?
I'd probably go the Northman number 2, and then The Lighthouse, then this. But I could maybe flip those last 2. I could maybe go Nosferatu, then The Lighthouse. And honestly, given this conversation, I might end up there. Because, and again, I love The Lighthouse as well, but there is something about this conversation and how it's even amplified those themes even more for me than I did wrestling with it on my own. So
Sure.
I like,
I think
again, like despite my criticisms, I've actually come out even higher on this film than I did previously.
I love when that happens. I love when that happens. I've the more certainly this conversation has done that for me, but the more I've thought about it, that's always a great litmus test, I think, for anyone who
Mhm.
thinks about films as much as we do, as much as anybody does. But if you continue to think about the movie and just find more and more to admire and find yourself having a higher opinion on something, the more you think about it, even only having even maybe seen it once or
Yeah.
twice,
Yeah.
or you're a psycho and you watch it 3 times, like myself. You just
Yeah.
you find more and more to like about it, and that's maybe what serves your opinion of it, or just serves the film in your eyes as a whole. But yeah, I think for me it's like it's probably 2, but with The Witch being number 1. But then it's like, again, this is a like 1A through 1D sort of situation.
Yeah.
Because I don't, as you said,
Yeah.
you don't want to rank your children. You can't.
Yeah.
It's almost
Exactly.
impossible
That
because
is
I
exactly how I
truly
feel.
think he's 4 for 4.
Yeah.
I was like mid to low level high on The Lighthouse when it first came out. And in the years since, I have only grown to love that movie and view it as a genius work of storytelling. I think the more I think about The Northman, I have a similar effect to this conversation, and my thinking on Nosferatu has just improved my feelings on The Northman, thinking it's even better than I thought it was back in 2022. And The Witch, I think, just speaks for itself as a triumph, even as a debut.
Yeah.
I think it's a really, really great work. And my mom, I just have to throw this out there. My mom is just like, why on earth would anybody put this in theaters on Christmas Day? Nosferatu? I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. Christmas Day is like a big
Huge
day
day.
at the movies. Like, it's not big. She's like, yeah, but it's a horror movie. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's a big day for sales, and it's a
it
big
worked.
release day.
It
like,
worked.
Very
This
coveted,
film,
and it worked. It was very successful.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, Mom, but you missed this one.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely been well received at the box
Certainly.
office. But yeah, I mean, I guess to just kind of finish that thought, I mean, I completely agree with you. Like it's really hard to rank these, and over time, I think there's a great possibility that this will even climb higher for me, and maybe I'll look back at my 2024 rankings in another 5 years and think that I was crazy to put it as low as I did, even though it'll still be in my top 20. But
I hate looking at my old lists.
I know,
Like, you moron.
Like, well, Brendan and I revisit them all the time. That's why we love kind of having these retrospectives that we do from time to time. So
Yeah.
because those lists, they always change. They always evolve for sure. All right.
I even look back at last year, and I'm like, I just had Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning as 26 out of my top 25. I look at it now, I'm like, that's number 8 if you read it today. You absolute blithering idiot.
Yeah. And look, that's another one I have to wrestle with, because I'm still kind of mixed on that film. But
So good.
The second film might kind of remedy my issues, so we'll see.
We'll see.
At any rate,
Final
Nosferatu,
later this year.
A really great film. I guess my last thought here is I really like the score here from Robin Corlon. I think is really fantastic.
Yes, I completely agree.
So just wanted to shout that out.
First work of theirs on The Northman, I believe, and
which I love there as well.
First major feature work, and then continuing to partner with Eggers. I'll be really curious to see if that partnership continues, because I agree. It's really, really excellent.
Good stuff. All right. Well, with that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com as well. Will, thanks for being here. This was a pleasure, my friend.
JD, thanks for having me as always. This was This was wonderful, and I couldn't agree more. Now I'm just going to be, I'll lay my head on the pillow thinking about Nosferatu. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm going to go in the good camp for now.
Yeah, there you go. Where can the good people follow you on social media?
You can just search my name, and I'll probably pop up. Will Bjarnar on Twitter/X, Letterboxd, Instagram, Blue Sky. I need to get more active over there as we continue our migration. As the good people of the West. That's pretty much it. And I'm writing in a number of places, In Session Film being foremost among them, of course.
Yep. Love having Will on the website. So yeah, you can certainly check out his work there. Please be sure to go and give him a follow on the social medias as well. Also just want to quickly note, our other review for this week will be A Complete Unknown. So that is coming soon as well. And then episode 617, I believe we are on.
Wow.
That's going to be another catch-up episode. Brendan and I are going to talk about a bunch of films we haven't had a chance to yet. So we're going to dig into the documentary No Other Land. We're also going to talk about I'm Still Here, the Seed of a Sacred Fig, Almodovar's The Room Next Door. I think we're going to get into Cillian Murphy and the Small Things Like These.
Oh my God!
Oh,
you guys need a guest?
I mean,
you're just listing off movies I loved.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into all those and certainly more as well. Hope Brendan will, and again, just keep warming up, because with Brendan's fever, it's certainly possible that I might have to bring you from the bullpen once again.
The arm is always ready.
Okay. So just gotta be ready. But that's all coming down the pipeline this week, so be on the lookout for all of that. Thanks again, Will, for being here. Really appreciate you. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.